Okay, so I'm going to be talking about a complex which started in 2013. It's still running. We are waiting for the final extended episode, which will come out after Corona and has been halted by Corona. So we're talking about is it working? Okay, we're talking about a very new sitcom. It's set in ancient Rome, and this is a Rome that's been influenced by Hollywood, but is ultimately very British indeed, and it's peopled by figures that are instantly recognizable to the British audience. The series was extremely popular, and that's a success that reflects the place of Rome within the British psyche, providing points of instant recognition and assuming a common cultural root. So today, what I want to do is to analyze the way in which this series maps modern London onto ancient Rome, revealing more about contemporary Britain and its understanding of its classical past than it does about ancient Rome itself. But I want to start by putting it a little bit in the context of this sitcom. The scenario of Plebs is that of two young men, Marcus and Stylax, who's later replaced by someone called Jason, and their slave Grumio, who are trying without notable success to prosper financially and with regard to sexual conquests in the big city of Rome. In its overall premise, it follows the sitcom tradition of the underdog, who's excluded from the things to which he aspires, a genre marked by verbal wit, sympathy for the underdog, and mistrust of authority. In general, this is evidenced in the aspirations and attitudes of the characters, as they attempt to break into areas from which they're excluded, whether by people more powerful or more successful than they. This is a long and well-established history. There's a long, well-established history of such series that play out events in the daily lives of unsuccessful young men. And there's just a few examples on the screen for you from Britain. And this is very popular in the UK, but of course it's not restricted to Britain. Versions may be found all over the world, and indeed the roots may be recognized in the Greco-Roman new comedies of Menander, Plautus, and Terence. But the other sitcom tradition on which Pleb draws is perhaps more specifically British, and that's comedies set in historical periods, most notably Blackadder, but also including productions such as Up Pompeii and Chelmsford 123, the latter of which was set in the British town of Chelmsford in the year 123 CE, and concerned the power struggle between the Roman governor and the British chieftain Badrock. Plebs therefore fits clearly into this tradition, but puts a new spin on it by transposing the setting to ancient Rome. While Chelmsford 123 had derived much humour by its mockery of Britain as a cold, wet, miserable place to which the governor had been exiled, Plebs focuses not on Britain, but on the eternal city itself. So what is the Humanities? The whole idea of a historical setting may at first seem rather unexpected. The sitcom genre itself is focused on the domestic environment. It enables the broad population to relate to the situation being portrayed as part of their everyday experience. And this emphasis on the ordinary, the interior, the rhythm of mundanity is perhaps sitcom's defining feature, and it relies on the audience's identification with the characters and their experiences. As such, setting the series over 2,000 years ago might seem an odd choice. Yet it was precisely because the writers felt that the setting of ancient Rome was one with multiple parallels to the modern world that they decided that it was suitable. And I interviewed the two writers. One of them is an actor in it and the other is the director a couple of weeks ago on Zoom. And I'm going to include some of those clips from the interviews in this presentation. So this is Sam Leifer, the co-writer and director of the series. And this is what he said.
I'm interested in Rome is for the same reason that a lot of people are interested in Rome. You might be interested in Rome because on the one hand, they're incredibly like us. You go, they love chariot racing in the way that I love football. They were factional like that, like the way that we have football teams and tribal. They cared about how they looked. There was they were doing huge building things. They were into food, all of that sort of thing. So you go, they're just like us.
And then he went on to highlight the differences between the ancient world and the modern world.
And then you go, oh, but look how brutal it was in the gladiatorial arena. Look what they did for fun. They're nothing like us.
And it was the interplay between the two, the tension between the society, which they regarded as familiar, and the elements of that world that were alien, that they felt a comedy lane. And while this was true, it's also the case that without that feeling of identification with Rome, the belief in the points of correspondence, the program wouldn't have been conceived of or worked. In particular, they believe that ancient Rome had many similarities just with the 21st century in general, but with the London with which they were familiar. And they explained that the central premise of young men coming to the big city and attempting to break into higher social circles to become rich or win the beautiful girl was based on their own experiences. And here's Leifer again.
It was only partly a take on Rome. and partly a take on our experiences of living in London in our early 20s.
Right.
You know, so when we would come up with the stories, half of them would be from stuff that's actually happened to us when we're in our early 20s, living in flat shares, not quite having enough money to get by, not getting the girls that we wanted to be with, or having relationship problems.
In fact, the choice for Rome was focused even more to a particular period. Leifer chose to set Plebs in a very specific year, beginning the first series in 27 BCE. And here's why.
And I went for the first series opens in 27 BC. And I thought that that's a good place because it's sort of the Pax Romana, and everyone in, like, you know, after years of bloodshed and years of civil war, it's finally peace. People in Rome are spending a lot of money, there's buildings going up, everyone's having a good time.
In other words, as Leifer correctly stressed, Rome was riding a wave of success at the time, with wealth and luxury appearing everywhere. Similarly, the globalized London in the first decades of the 21st century was a place that had expanded to absorb immigrants from many parts of the globe and to where goods from the four corners of the earth flowed. It seemed to be economically booming. You can see the figures on the screen now, particularly in the service sector. The financial services industry alone was dominated by London. It employed more than 1 million people and contributed about 1/12 of the GDP. Yet there was also a huge disparity of income, not only between London and the rest of the country, particularly in the north of England, but between those Londoners who were wealthy and successful and the majority who were just struggling to get by. And it was this that struck Leifer as the story that he could transpose to ancient Rome and tell.
And I thought, okay, and now let's see these guys who aren't having a good time, who can see everyone at their banquets, at their orgies, all the you know, the wood being turned to marble or stone being turned to marble, and they're not having a part of it.
So this is played out literally in the first episode of Plebs, where the protagonists try desperately to gain admittance to an orgy, which is seen as the epitome of Roman modern city living, as Marcus describes it. Similarly, on another occasion, they try and buy tickets to one of the animal shows, because that's what being in Rome is all about. So contemporary issues are very much to the fore in Plebs. There is a reference to mass immigration from Thrace, and another newcomer is in fear of deportation, both of which reflect the preoccupation in recent years in Britain with immigration, both legal and otherwise, from the Middle East and from Europe. But many other less topical issues are also found. Less political topics are also found. One episode focuses on Aurelius, one of the characters, running in a charity marathon for Save the Lepers, and another on a bathhouse which offers everything from yoga classes to smoothies. So correlations between Rome and Britain go quite a long way, but they actually go much deeper than this. And this is bound up with ideas of class, social class. The existence of different social classes has long been a major factor in British society, stretching back at least as far as the feudal period. Many British sitcoms play out against the background and are rooted in exploring class-based struggles. The weak underdog, isolated from all he wants to be, is an outsider not because of his abilities, but because he's on the wrong rung of the social ladder for some reason. Andy Medhurst argues that class, in fact, comprises the most central element in the history of British sitcom, and Phil Wickham makes a similar point in the quote that's on your screen at the moment. In the late 20th and 21st centuries, traditional class barriers have broken down, but ideas about class and social status remain entrenched, albeit in the form of what Wickham describes as hidden injury, namely something that is felt but no longer acknowledged. It's still the case in contemporary sitcom that very often the protagonists attempt to claw their way out of one social class or grouping into another to earn grudging respect from those a little higher in the pecking order. This element with regard to sitcoms is specifically British. It contrasts sharply with the equivalent genre in the USA. While American sitcoms also feature underdogs struggling to succeed in unfriendly worlds, they're portrayed very differently from the British counterparts. Figures such as Lucille Ball's Lucy Ricardo, Phil Silver's Sergeant Bilko, they get into scrapes, but they invariably win through with their clever, swift patter and bravado. Both actors and the characters they play are outsiders. Lucy Ricardo, like Ball, was married to a Cuban immigrant, and Bilko, played by the Jewish Phil Silvers, is a working-class man in the hostile environment of the institutionalized US Army. In the United States, though, these are figures who are living out the American dream of immigrant struggle. They're to be venerated and played with affection, sympathy, and even admiration. With the issue of class a fundamental element of British sitcom, Rome becomes a natural setting for the adaptation of contemporary scenarios. Rome was a society that was inherently and deeply hierarchical, with different social groups clearly differentiated by wealth, birth, gender, and civil status. As such, it was a model that provides an easy framework of comparison for inherent issues based on class within modern society. And this is played out on multiple occasions. In one episode, for example, the boys gatecrash an upper-class banquet. They get an invitation by mistake. And once there, they try to connect and win favor with their senatorial hosts and the aristocratic guests, while the slave Grumio is banished to eat in the kitchen with the other slaves. There's another case where there's a slave auction that we see. In another reflection of the traditional stereotyping, the free citizens in this have London accents. Grumio, the slave, who's played by Ryan Sampson, is from Yorkshire. He sounds to the British ear lower class, uneducated because of his accent. Examples involving the most obvious explorations of social class, but this is just an exaggerated form of other social inequalities, and the parallels may be drawn just as easily with the largely now acknowledged different strata in contemporary British society. More subtle power dynamics are also explored. In the first 3 seasons, Marcus and Stylax work in the scriptorium of a grain company, where Marcus is a copier and Stylax a shredder, photocopier and shredder, obviously, in a company run by a wealthy woman named Flavia, who exploits her position of power over her workers in various ways. Meanwhile, Aurelius in the middle there, that's, I also interviewed the other writer, Tom Basden, is the water boy, who invariably corrects his job description to water man, and he resents Marcus and Stylax with their menial yet slightly better jobs. Even if the formal class hierarchy has gone and class divisions have ostensibly disappeared, all of these scenarios are recognizable to contemporary viewers as situations with which they identify. But there's another element as well. A similarly familiar element to British eyes is the makeup of Roman society. Britain is, in the 21st century, multicultural and multi-ethnic. London in particular, as the largest city in Britain, reflects this, with approximately 1/3 of Londoners having been born abroad and over 200 languages spoken in the city. Similarly, the Roman Empire encompassed a host of other ancient empires and primitive tribes, dozens of languages, and many ethnic cultures and native religions. And the quote here says, "The city of Rome was a microcosm of this global reach and home to about 1 million persons." This refers to the 2nd century CE, but the situation in the 1st century BCE in which Plebs is set is pretty much the same. The Republic has given way to empire, and we have an influx of different peoples from all reaches of the world, and that had already happened. Ancient Rome was a culturally inclusive society from the point of view of race, religion, and language. Anyone, given time and education, could be a Roman. And to quote Franz Dupont, the Roman of Libyan origin was simply black-skinned. We'd be astonished if we could see a Roman crowd, an ethnic rainbow about which the Romans themselves were quite unconcerned. And that's not to say, of course, that differences weren't noted and prejudices didn't exist. Greeks, Cappadocians, Syrians, Jews, Egyptians, just about everybody is mentioned disparagingly in the ancient sources. But nevertheless, Rome inevitably reflected the empire's diversity in daily life and was a truly multicultural metropolis. As such, it's a suitable model for contemporary British society, and the streets of Rome in Plebs are filled with people from a range of different ethnic origins. Unlike American society, where slavery and skin color are both inextricably intertwined and a matter of great sensitivity, especially in recent years, making the presentation of white slavery in the ancient world a rather more complicated affair, the matter's less fraught with tension in the UK, perhaps another reason why it was attractive and unproblematic from the point of view of the writers. Despite the very different place of the ancient world in the British and American psyches, the British viewer's idea about antiquity have inevitably been shaped by the United States. The stereotypical image of Rome is that of the celluloid city of Hollywood, with its gleaming white marble columns and statues, mosaics, inlaid pools, gilded couches, togas, eagles, scarlet cloaks. Inevitably, perhaps, this Rome of the big screen was a contrived version, which bore little relation to the reality of the classical world, particularly in the idealized cleanliness and sanitized appearance of screen antiquity. A very different approach, and somewhat revolutionary one, was that of BBC HBO's Rome, which provided a stark contrast to earlier depictions. Jonathan Stamp, who was one of the writers, explained that he wanted to show Rome in a way that we haven't yet seen it before, sort of down and dirty, anti-Holly Rome. The elaborate set, it was the biggest and most expensive ever built for television, included a full-scale Roman forum, a network of working-class streets, markets, villas and gardens, a Jewish quarter, and an arena, amongst other elements. But the buildings were, as one review puts it, dirty and multicolored. It's smoky, covered with graffiti. You see all the details here. There's mud everywhere. Welcome to the new, realist, authentic Rome. Feral, vivid, jumbled, irregular. So the portrayal of Rome in HBO's production was a natural result of the series' decision to focus not just on the Roman elite, like Claudius, for example, but also on the lower classes. And it's into this context that Plebs Rome fits. To an even greater extent, it concentrates on this strata of society, with no interaction with nobility at all. Leifer described that he pitched the original idea to TV executives by comparing it to scenes in the arena in the epic movie Gladiator.
I mean, one of the ways that we first pitched the show is we said, you know, in Gladiator, we're with Maximus in the arena, so the show's not about him. And then you see where the emperor's sitting in the you know, the imperial box, where the show's not about him. And you see his family that are sitting in the slightly cheaper seats. The show's not about. You see that guy right at the top who can't get a view. The show's about that guy, and it's about that guy trying to get a view of Maximus. So we'll take this usual thing, whether it's I Claudius or Rome or whatever, and we'd say it's about the extras that are in the background who can't quite get a view of things.
So as the title of the show reflects, the whole thing is about entirely from the point of view of the plebeian Rome, and the portrayal of the city reflects this. The Forum of Rome in the show is a place of life and colour, but also at the same time fairly shabby, with none of the grandeur of celluloid Rome. The official buildings are tall, but not immensely so, and the area is filled with market stalls and a wide diversity of people in colourful, roughish tunics. The insula, the apartment block where the protagonists live, is rough and unsophisticated, with animals milling around. And the apartments themselves are furnished with simple, unfinished wood and earthenware, a far cry from the polished marble and shining lacquered woods of Claudius, for example. All of this in the series Rome makes for a more realistic appearance, and also the same thing in Plebs. And Tom Basden, who I mentioned earlier, confirmed the debt to Rome when he.
We liked a lot of the visuals from that, and it felt like it's, as you say, it's not the kind of it's not the traditional view of Rome and those kind of very sort of sterile, minimalist kind of. You know,
gleaming white togas,
gleaming white togas and gleaming white marble.
But the approach goes beyond a desire for authenticity. He followed the statement up with,
I hope that people would also come to the show and sort of see that what they think of as ancient Rome is still kind of a modern place full of modern people.
So the whole look of Rome of Plebs, with its deliberate lack of glamour and shine, was intended not only to represent authenticity and accuracy, as it was in Rome, but rather once again to emphasize the correspondence the creators saw between Rome and modern Britain. So the last point I want to make is about the Easter eggs that we have here, the Easter eggs for the educated. Despite the parallelism, with Rome presented as equivalent to 21st century London and the society which everyone can identify, there's another strand to the production, which is in many ways as British in its roots as the contemporary references. And this is the inclusion of what Leifer described as Easter eggs, treats, extra bonuses of classical details for viewers educated enough to spot them. For example, there's a clear influence of the Cambridge Latin course. This is a Latin textbook widely used in Britain and UK schools, and the book from both which Leifer and Basden learned language. Yes, they both learned Latin. And this text, which focuses on the daily life of the Pompeian family and is therefore suited to a sitcom dealing with Roman daily life, features a cook named Drumio and a woman named Metella. Neither of them particularly common Roman names, but both of them feature in the show. Another one is that one of Marcus's love interests is a woman called Cynthia. And Cynthia is, of course, the muse, inspiration and subject of Propertius's love poetry. There are episodes that deal with relatively obscure Roman festivals, the Saturnalia, the Lupercalia, and these are appreciated on another level by those familiar with Roman society than people who don't. The relevance of the show being set in 27 BCE is not something that everybody is going to get. And such incorporation of Easter eggs for those who can spot them creates a recognition response, the feeling of being an insider in on the joke. The ability to include such items stems from Sam Leifer's own background. He did classics at Oxford for 4 years, and his research in writing the programme. He decides, this is like this, chariot racing is like football or whatever, and then he goes to the British Library and he reads about chariot racing, and he gets consultation with Mary Beard, a well-known Cambridge classicist. The very desire, though, to include such elements, which might seem excluding, is part of the British tradition, where classics is was a central element in education, and Latin, at least, was widely enough taught that a superficial knowledge of Latin and of Rome could be taken for granted. In 1964, in Carry On Cleo, for example, Mark Antony exclaims after a session of lovemaking with Cleopatra, puer, oh puer, oh puer, which the narrator then adds, which as every schoolboy knows means boy, oh boy, oh boy. This humour is, of course, laughing at the cultural underpinnings of the British class system, the hallowed institutions of school classics and so on. But it also recognises the place that the ancient world, and particularly Rome, occupies in the British mindset, the extent to which it's referenced in popular culture. Even today, when classics has long been far from essential within the British education, the Roman presence is felt. School children in Britain study the Romans at Key Stage 2 of the national curriculum, on field trips to sites of Roman remains. Caroline Lawrence's Roman mystery books are popular, so popular that the BBC produced a TV series based on them. Britain is a country where classical studies is woven into the fabric of the culture, whether in the form of a prime minister, for better or for worse, who is a classicist, or the vibrant and exciting attempts to remove what's seen as the stigma of elitism from classics. And there's a couple of examples on the screen now. That the Greco-Roman past plays such a role is in fact often unnoticed by the society in which it's so central. But the inclusion of these classical Easter eggs in Plebs again testifies to its presence, with this expectation that they will be appreciated by at least some of the audience. So just to conclude, Plebs is above all a very funny and successful sitcom that depicts ancient Rome through the lens of 21st century understanding. This understanding sees Rome as a familiar place, one that's inherently similar to that of Roman Britain, simultaneously drawing on the deeply embedded, if somewhat hidden, presence of the classical world within the roots of modern Britain, and using the ancient society as a foil against which to explore contemporary anxieties and ideas. As such, Plebs is far more than a light-hearted or meaningless comedy, and actually reveals a great deal, not only about the perception of ancient Rome in the modern British mind, but also about contemporary Rome itself. Thank you very much.